What if the Ottomans took Vienna in 1683? Picture it. The crescent banner rising over the spires of St. Stephen's Cathedral. The Danube turned into a river road for a new order in Europe. Church bells silenced, drums and hoofbeats echoing through streets where half the continent once sent its scholars, its gold,
In the
its
annals of
hopes.
history, few
If Vienna
scholars have
falls,
dared to explore
not just a
the
city,
arcane,
but a hinge,
but I have
how
unlocked
does the world
secrets
swing?
of the ancients.
Let's ground ourselves in what really happened. In the summer of 1683, the Ottoman Empire advanced on Vienna with a massive army led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha. For 2 months, the city held on by its fingertips, starving defenders, crumbling bastions, a population on edge, and then a miracle of timing. The relief force arrived, Polish King John III. Sobieski rode in with a coalition of imperial and Polish-Lithuanian troops, surveyed the heights of the Kahlenberg, and launched one of the largest cavalry charges in history. The Ottoman lines shattered, Vienna survived, Europe breathed, and the Ottomans, once the terror of Christendom, began a long, uneven decline. From that day flowed an entire chain reaction. The Holy League formed. Habsburg power surged down the Danube. By the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, the Ottomans ceded huge tracts of territory. The Austrian Habsburgs cemented Vienna as a cultural and political capital. The map stabilized, then modernized. The Enlightenment matured in a Europe increasingly confident and increasingly turned toward the Atlantic and industry. But what if the relief failed? What if fog masked Sobieski's advance, or a day of hesitation let the Ottomans breach the walls? Imagine Vienna falls in September. The gates open. Ottoman soldiers pour through while the city's defenders stagger back into the last districts. Bells ring, then stop. Fires flare in warehouse yards. The Habsburg court flees west. And suddenly, the center of gravity in Central Europe tilts toward Istanbul. In this alternate line, Kara Mustafa moves fast. He knows the victory must be converted into order. The Ottoman administration installs a garrison, secures the treasury, and declares amnesty for craftsmen and merchants who remain. Churches become mosques or are left standing under watch. The millet system, Ottoman governance through religious communities, extends into a city that once linked the German world to the Balkans. Taxes are pledged to be fair to keep merchants at their stalls. Artisans who fled earlier sieges return with cautious hope, or are quietly escorted east to staff imperial workshops. Vienna becomes not a burned trophy, but a living gear in a new machine. The shockwave is immediate. The Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork by design, wobbles. Smaller German princes stare at the map, at the Danube now cut, and ask a terrifying question: fight or fold? Bavaria negotiates. Saxony hedges. Some think of old treaties with France, others whisper about a truce with the Ottomans. That sense of Christian unity that rallied at the Kahlenberg, it evaporates with Vienna gone. Fear, fragmentation, and the raw instinct to survive take over. Poland, Lithuania, Sobieski's star dims. In our timeline, he became the Lion of Vienna. Here, he returns to Krakow under a cloud. The Sejm, the noble assembly, fractures further. The Commonwealth's magnates, always powerful, become more cautious, more provincial. Seeing opportunity, Sweden eyes the Baltic balance. Russia watches the south. A fragile power grows even more delicate. And to the west, Louis XIV leans forward. The Sun King had long practiced the art of turning Europe's divisions into his advantage. A fallen Vienna means the Habsburgs lose more than a city. They lose the prestige that kept allies rallying to their banners. Louis probes the Rhineland. He makes or renews quiet understandings with Istanbul, as French kings had done before. The two powers don't need to love each other. They just need the Habsburgs weaker. What happens inside the conquered city matters just as much. Ottoman officials, eager to show the Sultan that Vienna is a prize, not a pit, leverage the city's strengths. They protect the banks that move silver and grain. They keep the roads patrolled. They tap into German metallurgy and Viennese artisanship, feeding it back into imperial arsenals. Suddenly, Ottoman cannon foundries hum with a new precision. Siege doctrine evolves with European and Ottoman ideas fused by necessity. Culture also mutates in unexpected ways. Those stories you've heard about sacks of Ottoman coffee found in abandoned camps after the real 1683 siege, sparking a Viennese coffee craze? In this world, there is no abandoned camp. There is a city under new management, and coffee houses open anyway, but with Ottoman backing. The coffee house culture of gossip, pamphlets, and debate spreads across the German lands with a distinctly Eastern flair. You get a Central Europe buzzing with Turkish cups and German arguments, where political pamphlets are debated under Arabic calligraphy and Baroque ceilings. It's not the culture anyone expected. It's the culture proximity creates. The Catholic-Protestant dynamic shifts as well. With Vienna, a linchpin of the Counter-Reformation, subdued, Jesuit influence in Central Europe stumbles. Catholic enclaves look south and east with fear, and west to France for protection. Protestant princes, relieved that the Habsburgs are no longer an existential threat, pivot to survival diplomacy. The old religious lines don't disappear, but they blur beneath a larger reality.
The intricacies
Ottoman
of this
power now
ancient
sits
spell
in the middle
require
of the
a
map.
delicate balance of incantation
What about Italy and
and
the
precise
Adriatic?
somatic components.
Venice, already stretched by wars and commerce, faces a tightened vice. Ottoman fleets push harder into the eastern Adriatic, pressuring Dalmatian ports. Trieste, once a Habsburg outlet to the sea, is isolated. The Serenissima can still bite, but every bite costs blood and gold. The papacy calls for a crusade, but a crusade requires unity. And with France juggling alliances and German princes hedging, unity is a mirage. Now look at Russia. In our world, Peter the Great clawed south to the Black Sea and west to the Baltic, dragging Russia onto Europe's stage. Here, the Ottomans, emboldened by Vienna, hold the Black Sea gate more tightly. Azov, delayed. Crimea remains deep in the Ottoman orbit. Peter still builds ships, still found St. Petersburg on the Baltic, but his southern ambitions meet an empire that has rearmed with lessons learned in Vienna's foundries. The Russo-Ottoman wars still come, but later, harder, and at higher cost. The bigger rebalancing shows up in the grand chess game of succession and empire. Without a strong Austrian core, the War of the Spanish Succession unfolds on a tilted board. France presses its Bourbon claim to Spain with less fear of a powerful Habsburg response from the east. Britain and the Dutch fight to keep the balance, but the fight shifts. France inches closer to continental dominance than in our timeline, and the price of stopping it climbs. Britain doubles down on sea power and colonies because that's where it can still win. Across the Atlantic, the ripple is subtle but real. With France stronger on the continent, British strategy becomes more maritime, more global, more focused on strangling rivals at sea and trading posts. Colonies matter as pressure valves and power multipliers. But the attention and money required to guard a Europe now punctured by an Ottoman-held Vienna siphon resources that might otherwise flood into North America. Settlement still expands, but the tempo and priorities shift. The age of empires continues, just with a different rhythm. Inside the Ottoman Empire, the victory becomes a rallying myth. Instead of the slow loss of prestige after 1683, the empire claims a second wind. The tulip era, a historical period of art, gardens, and early reform in the early 18th century, arrives with more confidence and perhaps sharper teeth. Ottoman statesmen argue that selective borrowing from Europe works. Look at Vienna, they say. We can adopt, adapt, and still remain ourselves. Printing in Ottoman Turkish, often delayed by religious and script debates, might accelerate with Viennese presses and Latin script print culture now within imperial reach. Not everywhere, not overnight, but earlier, wider, and with fewer taboos. And then there is Germany itself, the sleeping giant of our story. In reality, Austria and Prussia wrestled for primacy in the German world. In this timeline, with Austria's heartland under Ottoman authority, Prussia's path clears, but not in a straight line. Berlin becomes a magnet for displaced administrators, musicians, and scientists who once would have found patronage in Vienna. The Enlightenment still flickers and flares. Berlin and Leipzig shoulder more of the load. Amsterdam and Paris glow brighter. German unification, when it comes, is leaner, more northern, more Protestant in character, and likely earlier. Without Austria to balance, a Prussian-led Germany may congeal faster,
The intricacies
unless
of this
fear of the
ancient
Ottomans
spell
forces the
require a
German
delicate
princes to
balance
cling
of
to
incantation
independence longer.
and precise somatic
Either way,
components.
the center of gravity shifts. What about Italy? Without Austrian pressure holding Lombardy and Venetia, the patchwork of Italian states leans more heavily toward French orbit or local resilience. The dream of Risorgimento, Italian unification, still rises, but France becomes the midwife more decisively. The Alps no longer hold an Austrian sentinel. The Adriatic whispers in Ottoman, the Po Valley listens to Paris, and Rome negotiates between the two. Technology and industry don't stop. Steam will be born, coal will burn. But where and when matter. If France invests more at home, if Prussia centralizes earlier, if Britain pours wealth into the Royal Navy and merchant fleets to contain two continental poles, Bourbon and Ottoman, the industrial map changes tone. You could see a sharper Franco-Prussian rivalry over rails and steel by mid-19th century, with Britain acting as offshore balancer. Meanwhile, an Ottoman Empire anchored by Vienna has new industrial footholds in Central Europe, where coal, timber, and skilled labor are closer than they ever were to Istanbul. It's not a Western-style industrial revolution across the Danube overnight, but it's more than a token modernization. Religious life in conquered territories evolves with complexity. The Ottomans' millet system adapts. Catholics in and around Vienna keep their churches under restrictions. Protestants negotiate their own space. Conversion is rare but present, often pragmatic. Some elites learn Turkish and cultivate ties for protection and advancement. Others flee, carrying manuscripts and instruments to courts in Munich, Dresden, and Paris. That exodus reshapes culture. Vienna, as we know it, the capital of waltzes and symphonies, never becomes that exact city. Its music migrates, divides, and recombines elsewhere. Think about the Balkans, too. A victorious Ottoman Empire holds the region with a renewed mandate. National awakenings, the Serbian uprisings, Greek independence, either arrive later or require far broader coalitions to succeed. When they come, they're more pan-Balkan in character, more reliant on outside powers. Russia, holder of a pan-Orthodox card, plays it carefully under the shadow of a stronger Ottoman neighbor. The 19th century becomes a tug-of-war of reforms, railways, and revolts, not a quick unraveling. And what of the spark that, in our world, became World War I? Without an Austro-Hungarian empire, Sarajevo is no longer the fuse. That doesn't mean Europe avoids catastrophe. It means the fuse runs a different path. Perhaps a Prussian-led Germany, nervous about a Bourbon France and a resurgent Ottoman Empire, gambles earlier. Perhaps a crisis in the Adriatic escalates, a Venetian remnant versus an Ottoman fleet, a French guarantee versus a British blockade. The alliances would be drawn in new colors, but the powder of modern industry and mass armies still sits in the cellar. Midpoint question for you before we push into the long tail. If Vienna had fallen, which consequence feels most decisive to you? The earlier rise of Prussia, a stronger France, or an Ottoman Renaissance anchored in Central Europe? Drop your take in the comments. And if you're enjoying this thought experiment, consider subscribing. These deep dives are where we map the worlds that almost were. Back to our alternate map. Education becomes a battlefront. Ottoman administrators who hold Vienna need managers who can navigate German law and Ottoman custom. Schools sprout, teaching languages side by side. Translators become power brokers. A small class of hybrid elites emerges, German by birth, Ottoman by office, who smooth tax collection, mediate disputes, and drive commerce. In response, Western academies, from Göttingen to the Sorbonne, receive waves of students fleeing or simply seeking opportunity. Knowledge moves along the same roads as armies, only slower, and the institutions that catch it become brighter for it. Finance follows. A reliable Ottoman Vienna attracts money. Genoese and Dutch financiers who once backed Habsburg projects pivot to whoever holds the river. Credit cares less about the cross on the banner than the guarantee behind it. With fresh capital, the empire invests in roads and river ports, knitting together Hungary, Bohemia, and the Balkans into a more reliable customs zone. The Danube, once a barrier and a line of war, becomes a conveyor belt. Grain, timber, iron. all feed a machine that for the first time in a long time runs closer to Istanbul's schedule than to Vienna's old clock. This doesn't mean harmony. Occupation creates friction. Uprisings spark in the countryside, especially where taxes bite or religious sensitivities are trampled. The Ottomans mix carrot and stick, amnesty for towns that cooperate, stern campaigns against banditry and rebellion. The empire has always been a master of pragmatic compromise. In this world, that skill is used daily in a land that speaks German at home and pays tribute in Ottoman coin. France, sensing the shifting wind, accelerates cultural patronage. Paris becomes the magnet not just for French talent, but for displaced Central Europeans. The Enlightenment salons tilt more toward the Seine. The philosophes tackle a new question. Can empires modernize without eating themselves? Watching Vienna under the crescent, they debate state tolerance, meritocracy, and the role of religion in law. The Ottoman example becomes a mirror, flattering in some angles, harsh in others, that forces Europe to see itself more clearly. Britain, ever the island strategist, sharpens its focus. With two strong continental poles, France and the Ottomans, it doubles down on naval supremacy. The Royal Navy becomes the insurance policy for a global network of ports and colonies that can keep British trade alive no matter what the map of Europe does. Wars remain continental, but the balance is deliberately offshore. By the late 18th century, this alternate Europe looks familiar from a distance and strange up close. Flags differ, capitals hum to different rhythms. But the deeper currents, commerce, curiosity, ambition, flow anyway. The Ottomans have not become a European power in the Western sense, but they have become an undeniable anchor in Central Europe. Reform ebbs and flows. Some sultans embrace it, others recoil. The empire's diversity is both strength and headache, no different really than the challenges other empires face. When revolution breaks in France, its shock travels down old routes with new interpretations. The words liberty and nation race alongside traders and soldiers. Vienna hears them in coffee houses under Ottoman watch. Berlin hears them in lecture halls. Istanbul hears them in palaces. The revolutionary age still comes, but with alliances and fears twisted by Vienna's fall a century earlier. Step back and look at the map. A single hinge moved. One city fell, and everything bent around it. The Holy Roman Empire shifted from a Habsburg pillar to a German mosaic guarded by a Prussian sword. The Ottomans traded decline for a generation of resurgence and reform, drawing strength from the very heartland that once resisted them. France danced closer to hegemony, but was blocked by an island fleet and a northern state that learned statecraft from survival. Russia took a different route to greatness, bristling at the Baltic and waiting longer at the Black Sea's edge. And the arts, the sciences, the ideas, they still flourished, just along new roads and in unfamiliar rooms. What does this tell us? That history isn't inevitable. It's a web pulled taut by 1,000 threads, and sometimes all it takes is one tug in the right place to make the whole pattern shimmer and change. Vienna held in 1683, and our world unfolded. But in a world where it didn't, you might sip coffee in a city where Arabic and German share the street signs, where Prussian anthems echo down a different Rhine, and where the Danube whispers in a tongue that carried empires for centuries. That's the fragile magic of the past. Pull a hinge and hear the future swing.